All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me today. Welcome to our Preparing for the Behavioral Interview workshop. My name is Brian Furnett, and I work in the Office of Career Strategies. Nice to see all of you today. And today we're going to talk about the behavioral interview. We're going to help you best prepare for this enigmatic part of the job search process. I do think it sort of works alongside the sort of more grandiose and more nebulous concept of designing and identifying a firm professional narrative, but it does have obviously some very important nuances that are unique to the interview itself, as opposed to or in comparison to the resume, drafting the resume, constructing a cover letter, things of that nature. So today we're going to talk about the behavioral interview. We're going to walk through some of the details about how to best prepare for that interview and what you can expect, and then most importantly, how you can work to refine and hone the skills necessary to ace that interview. All right. All right, so let's start with most basic. What is the behavioral interview? You may have heard of it also as referred to as the fit interview. We hear about the fit interview predominantly in the consulting industry because they have two types of interviews. They have a case interview and a fit interview. And sometimes those terms are used interchangeably. Ultimately, the interview is designed for you to discuss the details of your experience and your education and to see these collective experiences as one cohesive narrative. You are asked to describe and discuss the experiences that you've identified on your resume in great detail. It is not expected of you to recite these examples so that I best understand the nuances of your department or your former employer, but I do want to know more about how you coped with the experiences, the roles, the challenges that that experience provided you. So we're going to try to identify today how you can identify the best fit with your employer. And then I also, the point of hosting and holding a behavioral interview with applicants is to understand what they call the airport test. And basically that means, like, do I want to work with you? Do I want to have to coexist with you in a space or in a working environment? Can I rely on you? And can I feel satiated in knowing that you're going to bring forth fantastic ideas and a good work ethic? The fit interview or the behavioral interview is the best way to help convey this. And so it puts a lot of onus on the individual who's going to be interviewed to know that they are making sure that that information is made available through what they choose to share over the course of that hour or 2 hours or 20 minutes. And that can put a lot of pressure on an individual. So that's why we're here today, to help talk about the best way to approach this task. So it's all about sample questions. And the problem with sample questions, I mean, ultimately, you rehearsing questions and dealing with questions and learning how to answer and respond to these questions is important. I want to make that abundantly clear. The unintended problem with focusing solely on sample questions is that there are infinite sample questions. For any job, you could devise an endless array of questions about that job, about that employer. And as you want to prepare for your interview, focusing on offered questions, while it is a good strategy, it does have limitations if we solely think of it as preparing answers for predictable questions, right? If I rehearse all of my responses and I prepare all of my responses for these particular questions, samples, for example, that we offer up on our website, ocs.yale.edu. If you were to prepare answers for only those sample questions, and we have dozens of them, and then you go to the interview and they throw a question at you, perhaps it's even similar in its intent, but it's worded differently, and due to the anxiety or your overt preparation or any other number of factors, you just can't stick the landing. The whole house of cards crumbles down. And so we see this somewhat regularly, retroactively, of course, when people come to our office to say, like, well, I had this interview, I don't think it went so well because, and it becomes evident that they rehearsed responses in a way where they required the question posed in a certain way. And because they're infinite questions, that is literally an impossibility. So let's look at a couple examples here. You know, the dreaded tell me about yourself, we'll talk about that one. Why are you interested in position? Why did you decide to study X, Y, or Z? Tell me about a time when you led a team. Tell me about a time when you overcame a challenge. How would you describe your leadership style? How can you convince others of your opinion? So on and so forth. These questions are valid questions that help identify nuances of the self, and the employer wants to understand how you tick in these regards. But again, infinite questions. So how do we prepare them? Because right, I just completely dashed any strategy here, but fear not. So the idea is, while we have infinite questions that can be asked of us, we will use finite experiences and finite information to answer infinite questions. Now, this may sound oversimplistic, but you've lived these experiences, the experiences that appear on your resume. You have lived those experiences. They are yours. They are categorically yours and your own. You understand how you dealt with problems and adversity and challenges in those roles. You understand the nuances of those roles. And most importantly, and this may be an assumption on my part, you've prepared for the interview such that you understand how your prior experiences relate to the role you're interviewing for. Therefore, if you have a firm grasp on your prior experiences and embrace and understand the variability, the elasticity, and the versatility of these experiences, you can then use this information to answer infinite questions. If you understand what the employer is seeking through the job description, you have a very good sense, a very clear sense, and something of a predictable sense of where the questions will go. But you need not be focused on, this is the answer I will give for this specific question. It allows for you to not be so rigid and allows for you to be more nimble in the interview itself. And that's how we at the Office of Career Strategy recommend you prepare for these interviews, is through, and this sounds a little vague, so we'll get into it, but through self-reflection and the embracement of your prior experiences and the awareness, this was already mentioned, of how those prior experiences relate to the job that you're interviewing for, right? So that's the most important part. That is the distinction of the individual who is, a nervous wreck at the interview, and the other individual who can come in with a little bit more confidence, a little bit more calm, and they can get that left field question, but then be able to understand, at least take their best shot at how to respond, right? So we look at the sample questions here and you see a variety of different topics that can come up, but what you're leveraging here is you're using prior experiences to help justify the way in which you would respond in a given environment. If I'm an employer and I'm asking you about a time when you overcame a challenge, it's because I want to see how you tick. I would like to know, because you're likely to experience challenges in any work environment. Do you throw your hands up in the air and just say, I don't know, I give up? Do you bring people in to help you? Do you investigate or research potential ways of moving forward, brainstorm and use what you think is the sort of best strategy and make an attempt? People respond very different ways. And I'm sure you can even think of different ways that you've responded over the course of time. But you likely have a consistent method of approach. And that's what the interviewer is looking for, because your specific method of approach is going to be different than the next interview and the next interview and the next interviewer. So I want to try to make sure that I bring in the best candidate for the job I have available at my hypothetical place of employment. And I'm looking for all of these different angles and nuances to be on display, so I, as the employer, can make the best informed decision of my applicant pool and to whom I will make and extend the offer to. Okay? So we look at the tell me about yourself question as an important sort of obvious, you knew it was coming a mile away, and yet somehow this question seems to elude many of us, right? Because it comes in different forms. It can be, so tell me about yourself, why are you interested in this position? Tell me about what brings you here today. It's usually the first question. I could have just written up top the first question, because that's usually what it's going to be. So the tell me about yourself question, when it's worded like this, it looks a little tricky. Ultimately, it's pretty straightforward and pretty simplistic. So don't want to do is feel like you got to give me this thorough overview. We're in question one of, let's say, an hour-long conversation. I will get to it, trust me. What I don't want you to do is just go into autopilot and just tell me about your entire life. You do not want to go all the way back to childhood. You do not want to talk about irrelevant aspects of your background. today you may think that that aspect, I mean, what you'd have to really remember is what is important here. What is truly important? And the reality is what may be of most importance to you is not necessarily important to the employer. So you have to think of what is relevant to your audience. And you've likely all given numerous presentations in the past. I'm sure you've acquired the ability to adapt and modify your presentation in a moment as you look at your audience and you see their responses. And therefore you want to have that kind of nimble flexibility in this moment as well. So these are the things to avoid. What you do want to do is go backwards. You want to start from today and move backwards, giving relevant highlights with efficiency and brevity, staying relevant to the task. What we also want to be able to do here is be ready for interruptions. And this is important because this is one of the questions, I would not recommend this usually, but if you needed to ever memorize anything, memorize is maybe too strong a word. If you wanted to best prepare a response, this is the question to prepare a response. What does the sort of outline of this response look like? So if I'm interviewing for a job, I may start by saying, my name is Brian Burnett. I currently serve as Senior Associate Director in the Office of Career Strategy at Yale, where I have worked on Initiative X, Initiative Y, Initiative Z. Prior to my role serving graduate students and postdocs at the Office of Career Strategy, I served as Associate Director, where I worked with undergraduate engineers, and through that role, I worked on Initiatives X, Y, and Z. Prior to my time at Yale, I was at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, where I worked with social and behavioral sciences undergraduates across 13 majors and did blah, 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 blah. And I keep going backwards until I get basically the genesis point of either why I went into higher education administration and or that sort of initial moment. What I'm doing though along the way is sort of keeping track of my reverse chronology, so that if the interviewer interrupts me and they're like, oh, I went to Amherst, you know, I was in Amherst, I've worked there for years, you don't get thrown off. Because the worst thing is if you rely on that rote memorization, you become robotic and require the finish. I once worked with a student who I asked basic, tell me about yourself, when they came in for a mock interview, and they took a deep breath, looked slightly off kilter to the side, and just recited their entire resume. And it took about 10 minutes. So you can imagine my response, because as the slide says, we're looking at like two, three tops. And I just let him go because he clearly had put this all together and I wanted to kind of hear what he had to say. And at the end, I asked him, I said, you know, he looked exhausted after he said it because he was probably just trying to remember every single line. And it was literally about 10 minutes in length. And I said to him, how do you feel? And he said he felt tired. And I absolutely understood what he meant, because it must have been so mentally exhausting to go through something like that. And when you are so reliant on the next line being there so that you can understand what the next line is and that rote memorization concept, it must have been so stressful for him. And so, you know, we obviously knew where we had to go to work. And the idea here is you want it to feel natural. You want it to be a natural rhythm of sort of how you got to here today. And so I think the better way to look at this question is, why are you interested in this job, or what of your background suggests you're interested in this job? And that's how we can kind of begin to kind of map out what our response is going to be. So this is how you can think of it as a PhD student. You're currently in year X of your candidacy. You are studying and your research focuses on these topics. During your time at Yale, you have also been involved with these things, extracurriculars, additional projects prior to attending Yale. So you kind of go through the most relevant aspects of a given experience. You're at Yale, you're a PhD student, you're going to focus on what am I studying and what am I researching. Then we'll move on to sort of tangentially tied topics like extracurriculars, clubs, volunteer work, mentoring. Then we move on to the experience prior to that. Then when you get to the end of your chronological, reverse chronological lineup, you then tie it back together. And that's what we'll back to this later. It's called, establishing relevance. So I plan to pursue a career in XYZ because, or you can say these experiences helped inform my interest in going into XYZ because, and you have to have an answer. Now, obviously, I would hope if you're getting to the point where you're interviewing for these jobs, you know what the answer to that question is. But sometimes if pressed, we blank. Sometimes if pressed, we hadn't necessarily thought of the eloquent way to respond to that question. And employers really want to hear that. They want to see the genuine enthusiasm and passion that is behind your decision. They do not want, and some may go in thinking with some skepticism, that this is plan B, and you just need a job today. And whether that's true or not is everyone's, quiet business. But in this moment, in this, if I dare say, performance, you want to help assure me why this is what you want to do. I think they're owed that. So help them understand, why are you interested in this? We're not ranking things here. They don't need to know that this was plan B. They don't need to know that this is the third favorite employer that you've applied to in the last month. But you would contemplate this job, right? That's why you're here interviewing for it. So help them understand why. And that's, again, something that we do need to do a little bit of advanced preparation on. It's like asking ourselves, why am I doing this? I think that's a good way to even vet your applications, frankly, because sometimes people just apply to anything because they're like, oh my God, I need to get on this. And that's an understandable emotion and an understandable response. But I think it's better, and we feel better, and when we're in that interview, to be like, I know why. I know why. It took me a minute to think about it. I jot some notes down, but I know why this is part of my journey. Okay. So that's how we approach and tackle the key elements of this process. Now, again, this is just looking at a singular experience of Yale and your PhD, but you obviously have prior degrees, and you can go through those experiences if you feel that they are relevant. And there you go. And sorry about the last one there. You want to tie it to the employer as well, if and where possible. It's nice to say, like, I want to go into this field, but again, you're not applying to work in the field. You're applying to work at company X. So why also company X? And especially when you're applying to a range of different organizations, those nuances become very important. So again, we come back to our sample questions. But in the best preparation for the tell me about yourself question, look, we already knocked off 3 of the questions here. We already got the tell me about yourself. The tell me about yourself inevitably helps identify why we're interested in the position, why the firm, and then also why are we studying the things that we're studying. We're establishing relevance. We're weaving the narrative in real time. And so what we're also doing here is we're being very efficient and effective with the time that we're using in that limited hour with the employer to make the best first impression possible. We're being highly effective. And so that's another important component. Sometimes we're not on our A game there. Sometimes we're just so focused on, what are they going to ask me? Oh my God, what are they going to ask me? I need to have my wits about me. We really don't think that we are, ironically, more in the driver's seat. We're more in control here than we give ourselves credit for at times. And I think as you go through interviewing more and more, I think that realization becomes more clear. But initially, it's hard for me to tell you that and for you to say, I think he's right. Like, I think it's a matter of repetition and comfort in that moment. I think interviews are always going to be a little nerve-wracking, a little anxious, a little anxiety-inducing. But we do have some control over that. And this preparation really helps us quash much of that static. Okay. So let's see. So again, we're looking at the sample questions, and we think about ways in which we can kind of weave and construct these stories to help answer these questions as we move forward. And we want to tell those stories in effective and efficient ways. And there's a number of different acronyms here that you can use. We have we use these acronyms to effectively be good storytellers in times of anxiety and duress, right? Because I'm sure you know how to tell the story, but the question is, under pressure, how do we tell that story? Under pressure, do we give in to bad habits? Under pressure, do we sometimes meander with the details, the unnecessary details? Under pressure, do we somehow take ourselves out of the focus of the lens and let the name on the building try to sell ourselves? If you try to sell the exclusivity of your program at Yale, rather than telling me about the triumphs you've achieved or the skills you've honed and defined, that is really risky territory, if only because I'm not hiring Yale University. I'm not hiring the strength of your department. I'm not hiring your PI. I'm hiring you. And so I need to know, what have you done? And so we need to stay in the focus here. And that good, strong storytelling allows for that. And so that's what we're going to talk about right now. So some of these, and again, there's a couple of them here. They're relatively similar. You pick the one you like. Frankly, I'll tell you the one I like the most, and we'll go into that one. And it's just because it's a little bit more thorough than the rest, and it's the STAR one. But STAR method. We have situation, action, result, problem, action, result, situation, task, action, result, relevance. We'll get to that in a second. Situation, opportunity, action, result. Mostly the same kind of stuff. The elements remain consistent. Why I like STAR, why my office uses STAR, is because it really breaks down sort of the why are you telling this story, and it remains intact of like you have to think, why am I doing this? Why am I speaking of this instance right now? Okay, so let's see. Oh, sorry about that. So we'll go, before we delve into the example, let's talk a little bit about this. So situation, task, action, result, relevance. I'll admit, on other places on our website, you'll see just our 1R. I've begun adding the second R as of late because I think this is part of the nuance that separates the strong interviewer from the rest. So again, STAR and any of these other acronyms are designed to help you focused by talking about, if I say, tell me about a time when you experienced adversity in a work environment. How did you overcome that adversity, right? I need to know what the situation was, of course. You're then gonna tell that story about, well, I was working in this lab and then this thing came up. That will be the task. So then you now have your problem. You're gonna deal with your problem through the action, and something is going to come of your problem and your action that is the result. Not terribly, difficult to wrap your brain around, but the relevance is really important because it helps you circle back to the top and helps the interviewer understand, why does this matter to the job I'm trying to hire you for? Why does this matter to the job you want? So if the interviewee is telling a story about how they worked in the lab and they had difficulty with the people they were collaborating on a given project, but the job you're applying for has nothing to do with lab work, arguably one could make the conclusion of, like, why am I hearing this story? You're not going to work in a lab, so what does that have any relevance? But if you then, at the end of your story, you tell me about this wonderful instance where you clashed with some collaborators and then you worked it through in a particular fashion and everybody was happy-go-lucky at the end, that's great. You could say, I understand that an office structure such as this, one that invites close collaboration, can in fact resemble the dynamic of a lab environment. And I feel that through these experiences in the lab, I will be able to take this methodology and implement it in this environment effectively, swiftly, and efficiently. Well, okay, now you just helped them answer their own questions. If they were left with any insecurities or lack of clarity or understanding why, let's say, God forbid, they just kind of zoned out for a moment and they came back in and they're like, they're talking about a lab? I don't know. You are helping guide them, helping them stick the landing to this story. And that's the important component. And so that's why I love the second R, the relevance, and your ability to do that. It really makes you always correct. It's establishing the why and why does this matter every single time. I recognize some of the folks joining in on the session today, so I'll apologize if this is redundant, but like the way I try to describe this relevance piece to people is it's like an old middle school essay question, like just support your answer and you will be correct. And I know not everything is that simple, but if you just help me understand why are you telling me the story, which is ultimately what that R is, it really helps lock down the connections that you're trying to make here through this storytelling exercise. Okay, so that's why we stick with the STAR method. That's why we add that extra R, and that's why I feel like that extra R is really like the extra credit assignment of preparing for an interview well. If you can find that relevance, that nimbleness of you as an interviewee is going to really shine. Okay, so let's go through an example. Tell me about a challenging situation. Okay, so the other thing that we have to remember is you have about 2 minutes you're expected to give your response. You're expected to utilize this STAR tactic in about 2 minutes per response, which can seem really daunting, but if we think about it, 2 minutes is a fair amount of time. And so again, the efficiency of our storytelling, our ability to kind of stick to the important details is really on display here. So comes the chair of the committee, using to address membership for the consulting club. As we worked, the disagreement emerged among committee members about the proper direction, and I facilitated a solution. When I first became involved with the Graduate School Consulting Club, the club's membership was at an all-time low. A committee was created and tasked with developing a strategic plan for the initiative, and I was appointed chair of the committee. As we met, disagreement emerged among committee members about the proper direction. One group of the committee believed we should focus on building a new website, revitalize marketing efforts, and refresh the branding of our club. The other group believed we should focus on building stronger case workshops and preparation programs to increase membership. Both aspects were important, but our bandwidth would allow us to focus on only one for the first year. Early on, I realized this was a large task and I needed full buy-in to make the plan effective. I met with each subgroup separately to discuss key elements of success, and through this effort, it became evident that both groups had the best intentions and excellent ideas, but if we did everything at once, we risked nothing being done well. We needed to first build a strong foundation, which would include key aspects from both groups. I proposed a compromise to the committee, which included a 2-year plan. In year 1, we would focus mainly on building stronger programs and services, but at the same time, we would designate a smaller group to start work on mapping a new website and marketing plan. In year 2, once our foundational services were built, we would focus on complete rebranding and marketing. We are now at the end of year 2 of this initiative, and we have seen membership increase 62%. Our foundational programs average 40 to 50 students weekly, an increase from our 8 to 10 students 2 years ago. And then the relevance would be, I understand that working in these groups, or you could talk about how you need to roll out programs and how it's relevant to the job. That part is not reflected here. I apologize. And we have extended our services and resources to the larger Yale community, and have increased our partnerships with university centers such as this office. So I'm going to just go back real quick. So the typical answer is just this response. This is bad, right? If this is all it is, it would be, potential, it could be vacant. So now a more thorough STAR tactic was to go into these details, to walk me through the chronology of the process, to help showcase action. You don't need to be the only person on display here, too, is important. Sometimes people are worried and apprehensive that they need to be, I mentioned before, being in the focus. You don't need to be the only person in the story. You do want to focus on your contributions, which is also evident through this sample. But you need not be the only person in the room. And I think it's important to know when to talk about you and when to talk about everyone. It's I versus we. And that is also something of a delicate nature that I think a lot of people initially struggle with, because it's a lot of we, right? Academic writing, especially, it's a lot of we. You don't want to take full credit for anything. In these moments, I'm not saying take full credit where it's undue, but you do want to make sure that you are aware of where your unique contributions exist in the example. Okay. And again, results are both qualitative and quantitative. It is nice to see rates of change over time. That does help establish your impact in the mission. But it could also be the second paragraph where it identifies, excuse me, some qualitative elements of helping foster better collaboration with existing or external partners, which is, in places of employment, a high-profile task and one that is required. So you find this variety of results and achievements through these experiences as you prepare these narrative examples. Okay. So what we're also doing in the way that we present the story is that we're layering our response for follow-up questions. Again, you need not cover every exhaustive detail, but you're giving me the highlights, the biggest components, the key elements of that story, because we do have a finite time frame. And I said 2 minutes, 2 to 3. Rules are meant to be broken, but brevity is your friend here. So these other questions that can come up are fantastic questions that help nail down deeper, more nuanced elements and details of that given experience. I could say, well, okay, you worked with these different folks. You had this committee. There was turmoil in the committee. My goodness, we've seen that in our neck of the woods before. How did you, what did you say to them? You know, I mean, you want that kind of response from your interviewer because that means they're listening, and that means they're impressed. They want to know a little bit more about it. That's usually a really good sign. It doesn't mean I got nothing out of the story. What the heck are you trying to tell me about? Like, it's usually a really positive. Okay. And the other thing that you want to make sure you recall here is that you're not relying on a single narrative anecdote. I do think it's a good idea to come up with multiple scenarios just in case, you decide to talk about, let's say you were just part of an extracurricular club, like this example, where you had put forth a great initiative, and all of a sudden you find yourself using that one experience over and over and over again to convey different skill sets. That can ring a little bit hollow. And I use the words, versatility and elasticity before, but you really want to find multiple parallels of your various experiences over the course of time and how they highlight different skills, right? You can use something like your teaching background to touch on an array of different transferable skills, for example. You need not have to worry about ever creating another curriculum ever again, but managing a classroom, anything involving pedagogy. These are important components that showcase your efficiencies and effectiveness as a communicator, as a project manager, as a leader, as someone who's operationally adept, as someone who can be organized. And so you can use that single example in a number of different ways. But on the other side of it, if you're only going to use that teaching experience to showcase your organizational skills, maybe you just got lucky, right? So you want to think like, okay, well, I'm walking out of here having done a dissertation. Clearly, I had to be organized for that to kind of pan out. Have I ever thought about what my actual organizational concept was there? Maybe not. And so that's something you want to be able to dust off. So this is the part where I will not hold it against you, but I would love to see if anybody is interested in trying to tackle one of these STAR tactics in real time by identifying a prior experience of their own. We can use either of the questions that are here. Tell me about a time you needed to convince others of your opinion. Tell me about a time you led a team. We are a friendly group. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in, but you can unmute yourself and take the lead. But if not, we'll quietly let this move on and spare you of any awkwardness. Anybody just ready to raring to go? I know some of you have actually prepared for interviews, so I could also call you, but I will not do that because I'm a nice person. But anybody want to take a try? This is a good place to try things out. Okay. All right, final call. All right, we're all learning today. I see. Okay. So these are the types of questions, though. And I know you're all going to practice this after we get off the call, but these are the types of questions, and this is the type of storytelling that is really required of you to ensure that the employer best understands your methodological approach to the things you do. And that is what will differentiate you amongst a sea of other potential candidates. Okay? So you get through the hour. Congratulations. I hope you feel great. I hope you feel achieved and accomplished, because you should. But you now have to ask them questions, because they will say, do you have any questions for us? And you may be so exhausted and just happy to be at the end, you may be like, nope, I'm all set. Thank you so much, and ready to run to your car, or whatever the case may be. And sadly, that is not advisable for a number of different reasons. One, as I mentioned, as naive as it may sound, I do believe you're still in the driver's seat of this conversation. And it is a conversation. It may seem like you're being grilled, but this is a two-way conversation between you and the interviewer. This is an opportunity for you to learn about this employer, about this position, about the initiatives of this group and entity. And the only way, well, the best way to ensure that you're going to learn those things in that moment is for you to ask questions, right? So it's important for you to know what those questions are, to know what is important to you, and to be able to ask those questions, and always have questions at every phase of the interview process. If you're looking at a three-phase, three-interview process, you should have questions each and every time. It is important, though, to understand which questions are best at any given moment. So your first round is not the time to discuss compensation. It is not the time to discuss benefits. It is not the time to discuss vacation. It is not the time to discuss a start date. You're there to ask more high-level questions, overview questions, sort of thematic questions about almost the mission of the organization, the way, the challenges that they anticipate, elements about the position itself. Those are appropriate questions for a first round. You want to make sure you don't ask things that are easily found online. Do your research in advance. I would hope that would be abundantly clear. But looking at something like the mission of the organization, every organization has a mission statement. Read the mission statement. Read the website. Pore over that website if you can, to find that low-hanging fruit that can just help you also be and appear more engaged and more informed about the organization. It will go a long way. Please, try to not ask questions about the organization that are easily available elsewhere. Advice questions are fantastic, and they're a great way to leverage a group interview, right? Group interviews are hard. They're their own sort of challenge. You're sitting there with 4 people, and you're like, oh my God, I have to ask all of them questions? Like, people kind of get into the nuances of this. You can ask a question that you can get a response from every single person that's sitting in front of you. And you want to be, thoughtful about this. What do you identify as the biggest challenge awaiting this department at current? They will have one opinion, they will have another opinion, and so on. And that's going to give you now 4 different contextual lenses about this one role. And that's powerful. That's important. That will help you make an informed decision if and when the offer comes down the line. So advice questions, how have you, again, just what are the challenges? What are your favorite elements of working here? What's the best, what's the most powerful initiative that you've seen come forth? And you can find these, I think, especially as you're doing informational interviews and being more thoughtful about what you want out of a given employer, these questions will materialize. But advice questions are an excellent way to understand what separates company A from company B. And you can also showcase your knowledge and ask for more information about either be they business topics or things that seem more like professionally tinged. So what I mean by that is by looking at the mission of the organization, or if you look up the company, let's say it's a larger company or a more well-known institutional organization, you can say, I saw recently that you were in the news for these things. I noted that you referenced this recent trend in the market. Can you talk to me about where your concerns lie in the next 6 months, the next quarter? I mean, you can try to showcase that skill set and that awareness and that keen knack of knowledge that you possess, and that can be sort of an extra layer of the positive impression that you provide to your interview. So that's important too. Does anybody, I assume again, some of you I believe have done some interviews before. Does anyone have like a favorite? Some of us have like stock questions that I always think are good, but does anyone have like a favorite that they would like to offer up to the group?
I have one that I've been using a lot in interviews.
How are you?
Hi, I'm good.
Good. What do you have?
So mine's similar to the advice question that you mentioned, but I've been interviewing with a bunch of different organizations, and I just like to ask people why they're at that particular organization and what it is that they like about it, maybe something that they don't like as well, and how those things kind of balance for them personally.
Perfect. Excellent question. They're completely appropriate. Sometimes people are worried about, can I ask about things that they don't like? And I think that that's an important thing to bring up, because it's all about how you frame the question, right? There's a way to talk about that. I think everyone should be able to acknowledge the pros and cons of a given situation. You're not asking them to dish. You're not asking them to speak negatively. You're asking them to speak honestly. And if they're professionally inclined, they should be able to answer a question like that. And I think balancing it with the positive as well, Jessica, is an excellent example of how to make that question seem appropriate. Because again, you're there vetting them as well, and that's important to know. This is also a good place for you to ask, and this should be the final thing you ask them, is what are the next steps in this process? Because there's nothing worse than going for an interview and you're like, wow, I felt really good about that. And then like 3 weeks go by and you're like, what does that mean? And you start to internalize all of it and you're trying to look for signs in the universe. Like, you can just ask them, like, what are your next steps and what is the timetable for this position? They may say, well, it's June, it's late June, we're all going on vacation next month. We'll see you in August, or, you hear from us in 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, now you have an idea, you know what you're to anticipate. That still may not be completely accurate information, but at least you have something to go on. And that can give us a lot of assurance as we look at the, again, the sort of rigidity of these times. Sometimes it's self-imposed rigidity. We think, oh, they're going to they're going to get back to me in 2 days, and all of a sudden, like, it's 4 days and you haven't heard from them and you're dying inside. And that's very understandable response, but realistically 4 days for a turnaround is almost impossible. So we want to make sure we're setting ourselves up with realistic expectations. Anybody else have any examples to share? No? Okay, Jessica, thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate that. All right, so again, we've kind of gotten to this point where we have hopefully a more firm understanding of the storytelling component of this. We understand that we have the power in that we are there to talk about our total experiences. You can then use those experiences to answer any question that they throw at you. That is my hope, that is my plea, and we want to help you get to that point where you feel very secure and certain in your ability to be that expert storyteller. So we have a couple things, points of reference that you can continue to work on this. Of course, you can go to our website, and again, you'll get these slides later, to go to the link that is provided, and then you can see all of our sample questions, and you can try to practice those out. And again, we talked about the limitations of sample questions, but you got to start somewhere, and this is a great place to start. You can also meet with us on a one-on-one advising appointment. For a one-on-one advising appointment, we do mock interviews all the time. When you're making the appointment, in the body of your request, just say, I'd like to do a mock interview, just so we have an idea, and that's all we need to do. It's all we need to know, and we'll work with you on that. Through your Yale CareerLink account that you use to RSVP for this workshop, you have access to a resource called Big Interview, and it is an opportunity for you to respond to pre-canned questions via video, and you can record yourself answering those questions, and then you can get feedback on your recorded material from the resource itself, but you can also watch your own video. So if you really want to be super critical, you can do that. And it is a great sort of warts and all way to really see the progress you're making over the course of time, but also to learn a little bit about the sort of nonverbals that are going into the interview, or maybe verbals, but the non-communicative elements of the ums, the likes, the pauses. Are you slumped in the chair? How do you carry yourself physically? Some of that can be an important component. So that's worth just being aware of and keenly insightful toward. And then, of course, your peers, right? I think it's important, if you've worked with folks in the past, or you know that peers or friends or colleagues of yours are currently interviewing for positions, ask them about their preparation. Ask them for their bits of insight, what has worked for them. Another thing to do with peers and colleagues and friends is that storytelling component. My biggest recommendation to people is to get a friend and just talk at them about all of the experiences that you will choose to share on a resume. Walk through them all. And the reason, that may take a little while and it's really one-sided, but that's why they're your friend, and you can repay them one day. But the idea there is that this person knows you well, but they may not know you in this professional context. And so they're going to get a lot of information from you, and they can help bring insight toward the tightness of your storytelling, the relevance of your storytelling, and even it's as simple as giving them a copy of the job description and a copy of your resume and be like, look, these are the 3 major components of this job. I'm not going to talk at you about each of those components as they've related to prior experiences in my professional life. And you just go. And this allows for those stories to get tighter and leaner. And even just a couple, if you can do this 2 times before an interview, it's going to feel night and day different. I assure you. I can tell you from personal experience, it's been just a revelation. And again, allows for you to not have to be answering specific questions, but instead focusing on the thematic elements of your experience and what the job is seeking. And those are the important elements, important components. All right, so I'm going to ask you to let me know if you have questions. Please do let me know if and come work with our office come by for an advising appointment, utilize the resources that we've talked about today, and we'd be more than happy to help you there. Oh, and let me stop the recording.